It is Friday, June the 15th, halfway through the month of June, bearing down sort of quickly on college basketball season. Today was the first day that college coaches could call 2020 recruits. So if you're seeing a bunch of 2020 offers and interests on your timeline this morning on Twitter, that would be why. We're just kicking it here on the CBB Central podcast, breaking down all the biggest news in college basketball this week. And Brad, how you doing, my man? It's been an interesting week with FIBA U18 stuff, and obviously the Bassey news that we'll touch on with Western Kentucky to start it off. But how's life, my man? I just got back from a day of driving, so I'm kind of zonked. I slept pretty late, but now we're ready to get this podcast going and talk some hoops.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. It's kind of a slow news cycle. Waiting eagerly for the NBA draft a week from yesterday. So, I mean, we're just getting all those rumors. See who's gonna end up with a lot of egg on their face, being so insistent on certain rumors. So, it is certainly an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get right into it with, I would say, the biggest news of this week of college hoops, and that's Charles Bassey, the 2019 five-star, committing to Western Kentucky and reclassifying to the 2018 class. And Brad, I don't think this really is surprising to anyone who's kind of followed this entire recruitment. Bassey's been a Western Kentucky lean for a while, and his offers, while elite prospect, seen by many as a top 3 player in 2019, didn't have some of the offers that you might expect. A Duke offer was missing. He had Kansas involved, but for the most part, I think most of us assumed that Western Kentucky would be the eventual destination. It finally does come down this week that he'll be at Western Kentucky, and he'll be there this year. So he joins the weaker 2019 draft class, which is certainly something to note for all the NBA draft fans out there. But overall, this is just a huge pickup, Brad. And I'd love to know your thoughts just on the entirety of it. But to me, this makes them a top 25 team in college basketball. Because Bassey, he's an absolutely elite talent. He's gonna just wreck college basketball, especially the Conference USA, with just how strong he is and how physical and ability to get to finish around the rim and rebound. He's gonna be a fun player to watch for the Hilltoppers.
So I was pretty surprised. I know that the crystal ball has had him going to Western Kentucky for a while. I remember maybe even like last year seeing a Western Kentucky pick pop up and be, oh wow, like this, the third ranked player in 2019 has all this interest and predictions for Western Kentucky. But I was very surprised in terms of the timing too. I mean, I was just on Twitter and I refreshed it and boom. I mean, Western Kentucky gets this game changing recruit, and I don't think I'd have them in my top 25, but they are certainly like right there, right on the door. If I was doing a bracketology, I would have them as like a 7 or an 8 seed. So like right outside that top 25, because Bassey fills a huge hole that they had at center. They lose Dwight Colby, the Kansas transfer. He was a grad transfer. He played pretty well. But he's such this physical imposing force that he's definitely a lot better than the bigs that they had, and I think he pairs extremely well with Deshaun Murray, who's one of my favorite grad transfers, and I think he's probably a top 10 grad transfer, in the country. So that's a very promising front court, and then you have 2 really good guards in Lamonte Bearden and Tavion Hollingsworth, who can both create. They can both attack off the dribble, and they will make his game look so much better. And then Western Kentucky has a ton of depth too. So this team's really the full complete package, and definitely a realistic top 25 team if you want to put them in there.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about this team. I was a little down on them comparative to, I think, consensus at points, just because I thought Darius Thompson was a lot more valuable than I think a lot of people thought. I think that Dwight Colby was super solid. Justin Johnson was just a terrific player. So I was a little down on them. I didn't have them as my favorite before the Bassey news. I had Marshall. A lot of people were pushing for Western Kentucky, but I really just love the way this roster is made up now. The Murray-Bassey front court is really interesting because I think Bassey can learn a lot from a veteran like Deshaun Murray. That's, I think, something that can get underrated. Is just Deshaun Murray really helped that entire Auburn front court. both I think Chuma Okeke and Anthony McLemore, just in the ability to hustle and bring energy and show them that was what they needed out of the front court. I think that's what Deshaun Murray can help Charles Bassey do, is play super hard and show him that's what he needs to do on the floor, teach him a lot. That 4-5 combo will be super fun to watch, and they're just super deep. Now there are 2 over the scholarship limit, so I would say there is a chance that they might lose a recruit or 2. Maybe Mustafa Diagne might transfer now that his kind of path to playing time is pretty scarce at this point. But as you said, Bearden at the 1. They also have Delano Banton, who's a top 100 recruit, who's one of the bigger stock risers in the country his senior season, who signed early with Western Kentucky, 6'5". I think he's kind of similar to Darius Thompson in many ways. So he can kind of fill that role as a bigger guard. He can kind of play the 1, 2, or the 3 in the Conference USA. Obviously Hollingsworth. I'm super excited about Josh Anderson, who definitely came onto the scene as the season went on. Who's a top 60 recruit in college basketball in the 2017 class. And they do have Jared Savage as well in the backcourt, a guy who transferred in from Austin Peay. His numbers were solid, certainly not incredible at Austin Peay. He averaged 10 points, 4 rebounds on 50% shooting and 36% from the 3 as a sophomore at Austin Peay. But he's a guy who I know Western Kentucky's super excited about having, who I think they're much higher on than his numbers in the OVC might suggest. So they're super deep in the backcourt. The front court now has some much needed depth between Bassey, Deshaun Murray, as we mentioned. They also have Matt Horton, the JUCO player who protect the rim, was considered an Arkansas lean at one point. Galen Smith, who's a good recruit for them as a freshman. Mustafa Diagne, if he is still on the roster. So, up and down this roster, there's a lot to like. So yeah, I would say they're a top 25 team in my opinion, but definitely could be just outside that. But certainly the talent is there for top 25 selection with the way this team is assembled.
Yeah, they have 2 other guys too that were in the rotation this year as freshmen. Jake Omer was like an undersized shooter, and I mean he's probably in terms of talent he would seem out of the rotation, but they could use some shooters. And then Merrick Nelson, who was in the rotation as like the backup kind of stretch 4. He's like a pretty thin front court player. I mean, so that's even more experience in guys who were trusted to play consistently this past season on a Western Kentucky team that was super close to making it to the NCAA tournament, losing to Marshall in the Conference USA Championship, if I'm not mistaken. And then they had a pretty solid run in the NIT, showing that they were a strong squad. I do agree that Darius Thompson was a huge loss. He's someone that I really liked at Virginia. His ability as kind of like a combo guard, like kind of like a ball handling wing, could definitely be missed. But I mean, Josh Anderson certainly has the recruiting pedigree to step in there and have a big sophomore season.
Yeah, and I was pretty impressed with Anderson down the stretch last season. I thought he had some really good games. He's super athletic. He brought them a lot of energy in that 6th man role that he was playing down the stretch of the season. But looking at some of the stats he put up in the final few games of the year, he had a few big ones. He had 13 in that conference championship game in 27 minutes. He got to the free throw line extremely well in that game. Got to the line 6 times, 7 boards as well. He had 10 in one of the other conference tournament games against UAB. So he's a guy who the talent certainly pops off the page, and 19 earlier in the season as well in a game against Charlotte in 21 minutes. So he was a guy who I was kind of citing as a breakout guy in the conference. Now that Bassey's here, maybe not quite as necessary that he go out and get 15 a night, but the talent, he's so valuable as an athlete who can defend multiple positions, especially in a league like the Conference USA where the guys are going to be smaller. With his size at 6'6" and his length and his strength, he can defend 1 through 4 pretty comfortably. So super excited to watch his development as a sophomore.
So moving on to the U18 team, which is playing up in Canada for the FIBA Americas Championship. Obviously, they have a very strong roster led by a couple of 5-star players. The major standouts in their total domination through the first 4 games have been Cole Anthony and Matthew Hurt, both top 5 prospects in the class of 2019. Anthony is this scoring guard who can score at all three levels, while Hurt is a knockdown 3-point shooter and also a surprisingly athletic and aggressive rebounder and defender. So, Kevin, have you been able to catch any of these U18 games?
I must say I've been pretty busy. I remember seeing the incredible hysteria about the game in which the U.S. was leading 43-0 after the first quarter. But I was following the game on Tuesday as well between Puerto Rico and the USA. Quentin Grimes has struggled in this tournament, but had a big one there. This Puerto Rico team is interesting as well. I've been monitoring them just because they have a couple of potential D1 players. I believe they have George Condit, who's Iowa State signee. He's going to be headed there in the fall. He's a kind of long rim protector type, so he's going to be an interesting guy. I've been watching this tournament. I've been almost watching more the non-USA guys, and because I think you get a better sense than basically playing on an all-star team. For instance, I've been super high on Emmanuel Miller from Canada. He was a guy I watched with the U19 Canada team that won gold in Cairo last year. He's been terrific in this event. He's averaging about 15 points a game. He's got some stretch for equity at the next level. Hasn't really shot it the way he needs to, but very athletic. Could be a small ball 5 even. I like Andrew Nembhard a lot. Also the Canadian point guard product, who I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy watching play throughout his college career. He's averaging 17 points and 7 assists in this event. So I'm super excited to kind of watch all these Canadian guys. Some of the other Condit stats here, he averaged he's had a nice tournament as well, 10 points, 7 rebounds, and the Final Four in this event coming up here soon. So good event overall. It's been it's always tough to evaluate the US teams playing against inferior competition, but overall I'm excited. It's really fun to watch Canada in how they've developed as a country in college in basketball, and their continued ascension as a basketball power over the next couple of years.
Yeah, Canada, as you point out, has Andrew Nembhard, who's going to Florida, who will probably start at point guard from day one. They also have Tyrese Samuel, who is a big man, who's a top 70 player in the class of 2019. I've yet to catch a Canada game yet. I may watch them tonight. I watched all 4 of the U.S. games. I know a lot of people were asking why I'm watching all these games when they're such blowouts, but it gets to a point where like maybe a 30-point blowout isn't entertaining, but like the 80-point blowout is very entertaining. I mean, last night, Team USA, I shut the game off after the third quarter. They were up by whatever 60, 70 points, and they were full court pressing the whole time. They had never let up, just forcing tons of turnovers. And that's how Quentin Grimes got a lot of his points. But you were exactly right. I mean, he's really struggled. He doesn't seem to be a great shooter. He has kind of like a stiff mechanics. And he is a good athlete, but he's certainly not like a super explosive athlete. So I think he's kind of like a Malik Newman with a worse jump shot. I mean, he can get to the rim at this setting. I don't know how that's going to necessarily translate to college basketball, but I think he'll be like a good college player. I don't see him right now as like an NBA first rounder by any means, which being a top 10 player in the class of 2018 would indicate. I think between Cole Anthony and then Kobe White, who's also been really good. He's a knockdown shooter. He's headed to UNC where he'll probably start at point guard from day one. He hasn't really shown too much point guard skills, but I mean he can really shoot it and he can get to the rim. And another interesting player for Team USA was Ayo Dosunmu, who's headed to Illinois. He kind of reminds me a lot of Frank Ntilikina on the Knicks. I mean, he's like a 2-guard kind of who's like super long and a super aggressive defender. He's got like unbelievably long arms that have been, wreaking havoc on the ball handlers. He's been pressuring the ball a lot. So those are some interesting takeaways for the U.S. team. And another guy that I wanted to mention who's headed to South Carolina this year as a freshman, Alonzo Frink on the Dominican Republic. He was impressive to me in the Dominican Republic versus U.S. game. He's like a big-bodied power forward who can shoot a little bit. He can put the ball on the floor, and he's an aggressive rebounder. He was forcing a lot due to being on the Dominican Republic playing against this superior Team USA. But I think he'll definitely be in South Carolina's rotation, and he's definitely a player to watch down the road.
Yeah, good call on Frank. Another guy I wanted to mention from that DR team is Joel Soriano, 2019 big guy from New York City, who's going to be he's a 2019 commit to Fordham. Now that's obviously something to watch given Jeff Neubauer's maybe less than sturdy status as head coach of that program. Obviously his commitment could reopen should Neubauer be fired. But he's had a terrific tournament. He stands at about 6'10". He's averaging 8 points, 5 rebounds a game. He's definitely fit right in for me as a guy who will be a nice rotation player in the A10, maybe even a little more than that. Another younger guy that's on this DR team, Lester Quinones, who's only 17 still. I believe he's a 2019 prospect.
Yep.
And he's had a terrific tournament, 19 points, 4 boards, 3 assists. So he's a guy whose interest is only going to continue to pick up. And then one more guy is Francis Cafaro from Argentina, a Virginia pledge for this year. Still only 18 years of age, and he's been very solid in this tournament for an Argentina team that will take on the U.S. in the semifinals of this event. He's averaged 14 and 9, so this will be the good test against the U.S. front court today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get my first look at Francisco Cafaro against Team USA today. Just a couple other college guys to mention. For Chile, they have Max Lorca-Lloyd, who's a top 150 power forward in the class of 2019, a top 150 recruit. You mentioned Joel Soriano and George Condit. They were both really impressive. Really stood out against Team USA. Trying to think if there's any other college guys. None off the top of my head. In terms of Team USA, though, really disappointed also by Kamaka Hepa. I figured he would be one of the better players on the team, given he's a 2018 recruit and he's like a top 60 player. But he's really struggled. I mean, he's looked completely out of place. He's getting blown by defensively, both at the 5 and the 4. He struggled to finish around the rim. His 3-point shot hasn't been there. He's been totally ineffective, and that's something that really surprised me. And then Armando Bacot has had a lot of problems with not keeping the ball high. He's been bringing the ball down a lot, trying to dribble too much in the paint, and causing him to turn the ball over a lot in the process. So those are just kind of a couple of the disappointments for Team USA.
Yeah, absolutely. Good calls on both of those guys. I will kind of point out one thing I've been noticing on Twitter. To me, the kind of stupidity that coaches are just being sent. They're sending assistant coaches for like 2020 guys that they're recruiting, and they're just out there watching this entire tournament just to show love. To me, it doesn't really make too much sense, given that they're just out there watching a tournament for a week and a half, hanging out with the kid. I mean, whatever works in recruiting, I guess, but to me, it just seems a little unnecessary.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of that for Trace Jackson Davis. I've seen like Iowa's there, Purdue's there. Trying to think if anyone else has been bringing a lot of guys. Nothing off the top of my head. Also worth mentioning, two other guys that have played well that I didn't mention earlier. Tyrese Maxey played really well, the Kentucky commit. He's a top 10 2019 guy. He hurt his ankle, so he's out for the rest of the tournament. And Josiah James, who's kind of like a David Nwaba, Marcus Smart kind of player. He's like a glue guy. He's played almost exclusively at power forward for Team USA, despite being listed as a point guard. And he's just a really athletic, very disruptive player who crashes the offensive glass really hard. He's a very aggressive rebounder and struggles to shoot a little bit, but he's certainly a player to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of wraps up our discussion on this FIBA U18. We may bring you guys a couple of more thoughts as that tournament comes to conclusion. These final couple of games, semifinals and finals are the only ones left. Let's move on to a little bit of recruiting stuff to touch on. I actually have a breaking news one that we did not plan on the pod. Brad, I don't know if you've been on Twitter during while we're recording, but Saddiq Bey just popped to Villanova. I don't think this is at all surprising to me, given kind of the buzz recently. But any quick thoughts on Saddiq Bey off to Villanova, who's a guy who I think is a nice fit for them. Very long, athletic guy who can play 2 through 4. I think Jay Wright will get the jumper to where it needs to be, and the former NC State signee can play right away for the Wildcats.
So I was not surprised at all to see him leave NC State, given they are so deep with veteran players that he was not going to play as a freshman. Looking at this Villanova roster, I don't think he's going to play, very much either. Even like a superior ranked wing prospect like Brandon Slater, I don't really see how he's going to get a ton of minutes, given the breakdown of this roster. But I mean, it's certainly a good long-term pickup for Villanova. Just grabbing this top 100 recruit out of the air. They definitely benefited from the fact that the ACC wouldn't let him go to another ACC school, which is a pretty common rule. I know it's also a rule in the Big East where if you sign an LOI, like not even go to the school and then transfer. Like if you sign an LOI with a Big East school and then reopen your commitment, you can't go to another Big East school. I remember that was something with Mariel Shayok when he was at Marquette, and I know Providence really recruited him hard out of high school, or even, I mean, this is still when he was in high school, and then when Buzz Williams went to Virginia Tech, Shayok opened up and Providence can recruit him. But this is a very good pickup. A lot of the ACC schools like Miami and Louisville probably could use them more, but I mean that's just the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and on Bay, real quick, listed 6'7", about 200 pounds, comes from Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C. I think it's really interesting. As you said, the playing time isn't necessarily a clear path. I think maybe if he gets used in like a 4-guard look, then that's probably the best way that he finds playing time, where they maybe go Quinterly, Cremo, Phil Booth, and then a small ball 4 in Sadiq Bey. I think he might be a little better suited than Brandon Slater to be a small ball 4. And then Pascal at the 5, you want to go like a death lineup type of thing. That could be a nice little lineup for Sadiq Bey to fit in well. But yeah, definitely a long-term play. I think more than we need a guy who can give us 20 minutes a night this year for Sadiq Bey. Villanova still does have 1 scholarship left, so this doesn't really impact the Reed Travis potential. I'm sure Jay Wright wouldn't have taken Sadiq Bey if it would have impacted Reed Travis, but it doesn't, just for anyone who's wondering.
They also have a two other options at small ball 4 with Cole Swider and Jermaine Samuels. So I mean, they have a ton of options. They're really embracing this wing heavy culture. Another guy, the guy that I thought that you were going to mention when you were breaking this news was Jiri Baptiste. I saw maybe an hour ago. Presumably is going to be the second of this certain type of grad transfer. We've seen Dwayne Morgan do it this past year, where he's going to graduate in December, and then he would have a year and a half of eligibility. If he sits out the second semester, he would only have 1 year of eligibility. So like Morgan, he graduated from UNLV in December, then played that half year with Southern Utah, and now gets this upcoming season with Southern Utah. The articles I read didn't specify if Baptiste was going to sit out this whole year or just that first semester until he graduates, but he could be the second type of this weird type of grad transfer.
Yeah, good call there. Speaking of weird grad transfers, since we have not touched on him on the podcast, I will just bring up Stone Gettings from Cornell. His recruitment's been kind of quiet, but he's a guy who is going to sit this season and be a grad transfer. He's a guy who didn't really do much as a freshman, but then really stepped into a big role the last 2 seasons under Brian Earl at Cornell. This season, he averaged 17 points, 6.5 rebounds, 3 assists in 27 minutes. He's a guy with excellent floor vision, shoots the ball pretty well from the free throw line. So I know there's been buzz about Cal, but to me, that's another interesting grad transfer to watch for next year. Basically, a sit-out guy in terms of when you're recruiting him, but one of a high-level talent that I don't think we've touched on the show, and you kind of reminded me of him by mentioning a weird grad transfer.
Yeah, similar to Evan Boudreau and Makai Mason. So in the in the so in every league in college basketball, you have 5 calendar years to play 4 years of basketball. But in the Ivy League, you only have 4 calendar years to play 4 years of basketball. So anyone who gets hurt and like misses a full season and typically would be able to redshirt, they will get the redshirt year, but they can't use it at an Ivy League school. So I know that Boudreaux wasn't hurt. He just sat out this past season to get 2 years of eligibility at Purdue. But Mason was hurt last what's in the 2016-2017 season. So that's when he chose Baylor a full year ahead of time as his new destination. Ironically, he was hurt again this past year, which I don't know if he'll get a 6 year of eligibility from the NCAA. He actually might, but that's a similar thing with Gettings. I don't know if Gettings was ever hurt or is he's just intentionally sitting this season out. But that's a kind of a weird wrinkle in the Ivy League rules that allows their best players to make some moves.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I'm not really sure what to make of it because it kind of hurts the Ivy League in basketball, but at the same time, isn't that kind of they don't care. They don't care exactly. They're not worried about protecting their athletes' basketball careers. They'd rather just kind of move on. And I think that's the good chance for us to move on to a couple of grad transfers that we wanted to mention on today's show. One of them, Landon Gessling. Weird journey to the University of Houston, which is where he'll head next season. He's a guy who is grad transferring from a D2 school, had several D1 offers this spring out to come play D1 for his final year of eligibility. He's a guy who began his career at Appalachian State as a redshirt. Then he played as a freshman. He played as a freshman, then was redshirted, then transferred to a Division II school, and this season averaged 23 points a game at the Division II level. As a guy who shoots the ball pretty well. So just a good depth spot. He can play the point, he can shoot the ball, play off the bounce. Comes from a good D2 program. So nice piece for Houston as they kind of gear up for an A10 title run in a weak league.
Yeah, I think Houston, could definitely win the conference. I think that they're probably an NCAA tournament team, at least a bubble team. Landon Gessling probably fills the role of Wes Van Beck, who played 10 to 15 minutes a game last year. I'm pretty sure Van Beck's has graduated, but he'll join a pretty solid backcourt with Corey Davis, who was the second leading scorer last season and the leading returning scorer, and then UMass and JUCO transfer Dejan Giroux, who's a former top 60 recruit. He's a very athletic scorer. They also have Armani Brooks, who played pretty well off the bench last year, and I've seen a lot of NBA draft Twitter kind of mentioning him and stashing him in their minds for next season. He's someone who has a pretty nice long-term prospect, and they have a really solid steady point guard in Galen Robinson, and then a top 100 kind of bigger point guard wing type in Nate Hinton. So this is a underratedly good and deep team.
I'm really interested to see how they kind of run everybody out there because you have to kind of figure that Galen Robinson is the lead guard on this team, but you also have Corey Davis, who played a lot last season for this team. He's 6'2", a very nice piece for Houston. And then the two bigger guards, Giroux, who can play on the ball or off the ball, and then Nate Hinton, who can play on and off the ball, the freshman. So to me, it'll be really interesting to see kind of some of the small ball lineups that they could go out there with maybe Hinton at the 3 or the 4. Bryson Gresham's a guy who I think people have forgotten about, but is a very solid player. Was a highly regarded recruit. Didn't really fit at UMass his freshman year, but was a package deal with Giroux. So definitely a couple guys to watch on this Houston team. They're going to be a team that I have to really watch the first couple of games of the season and get a better sense for, but I'm pretty excited to see what they can do in terms of their roster versatility.
Yeah, the whole AAC is filled with potential bubble teams. They have 7 or 8 teams that I think you could reasonably say, could be on the bubble. But I think the 3 that really stand out are Central Florida, Houston, and Cincinnati. I know that a lot of people have Cincinnati in their top 25, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But as like a top 40, top 45 team, I think that's a very fair and reasonable range for the Bearcats. So I think that's like the top three in the AAC. But then you have SMU, UConn, Temple, Memphis, and Wichita State, who are all certainly reasonable teams to include in a preseason bracketology.
Yeah, I literally have no feel on the AAC next year. I've had a few questions in my DMs from people like, "What do you think of the AAC?" And I'm like, I truly have no idea. Like, I like UConn potentially, but I also have some pretty big concerns. Memphis has the talent, but Penny's first year will be an interesting one. So overall, it's going to be a fun league, I think, just because it won't be great, but it'll be super competitive. I think it might be a league where everyone beats each other up, and it kind of hurts the league in bubble discussions. So that'll be interesting to watch. Another grad transfer that popped was Tory Miller-Stewart to Denver, which has quietly added like the best grad transfer front court I think you could possibly put together at the mid-major level, between Ronnie Harrell and Tory Miller-Stewart. Miller-Stewart averaged about 6 points and 5 rebounds for Colorado. He's a physical, 6'9" big guy, who helps this team. And between those two and Joe Rosga, there's something there with this team. And obviously, I think South Dakota State enters the favorite, and rightly so. And there are a few other teams that can make an impact. But I'm really intrigued by this Denver club, and I think they have some upside, between Miller-Stewart and Harrell and all. And then obviously Rosga, they also have some younger guys who are pretty talented. So looking forward to monitoring this team in the summit.
Yeah, I was very interested in Tory Miller's recruitment because he's someone who he was hurt his senior season, so he got the 5th year. So he was kind of understandably recruited over at Colorado because the coaching staff thought he would graduate and be done with his eligibility. They didn't predict, obviously, he would have a season-ending injury. And then I guess Arkansas was seen as the favorite because I guess his parents played for Arkansas, but then Daniel Gafford unexpectedly came back, and that kind of put him back into limbo. And I didn't see any teams mentioned with him after Daniel Gafford came back to Arkansas. So I was very surprised to see Denver. I know that there are a few high major teams out there that could use a backup center, or even a starting center in the case of like a Pittsburgh or a Cal. But those teams obviously aren't going to be very good, and Denver has a chance to win a lot of games and give Miller a lot of playing times. That's a pretty good fit there.
Yeah, Denver's a pretty interesting team this year. Obviously, as you mentioned, I think the playing time is certainly a big draw. But they have a big recruiting class coming in for Denver. They're actually 2 over the limit now, so maybe some of these guys do fall off. But they have some interesting signees as well up and down their roster. So I'm kind of intrigued to see what they can put together. They're about 500 team this year. They lose their starting center Daniel Amigo, but I really like the versatility of a guy like Harrell in the mid-major level. So I'm excited to just watch how he plays kind of next to Joe Rosga, who's kind of a combo guard where you could have both of those guys as kind of secondary initiators of the offense, kind of running the break as well. So overall, it should be a pretty fun team to monitor.
Yeah, that's about it for the grad transfers. There is one pretty big sit one, play one transfer, which I always like. There's certain situations where a sit one, play one is really advantageous. I remember Ryan Anderson going from Boston College to Arizona comes to mind. And then we mentioned it, I think, on the last podcast about Mariel Shayok going from Virginia to Iowa State as one situation I like. I also like this situation, Andrew White going from Charlotte to Wake Forest. This is Andrew White, the former Nebraska, Syracuse, and Kansas player. His younger brother. White is a kind of a combo guard who can score. He really made an impact in Conference USA throughout his career for Charlotte. And Danny Manning desperately needs to add as much talent as he possibly can with losing Bryant Crawford and Doral Moore. And it is reasonable that maybe Manning won't even be there to for White to play, but that's an excellent player to set up the next coach with at a worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's a good call. They also have one other transfer coming in, who I believe is a sit one, play one, Torrey Johnson from Northern Arizona.
He's
Um,
actually a grad transfer with 2 years of eligibility.
oh wow, huge! I
Yeah.
missed that one come through. So Torrey Johnson will give them some help in the backcourt. This is a team I'm actually intrigued to watch this year. I don't necessarily think they'll be good, but I think they'll be pretty fun because they have Jalen Horde, who is a top 15 recruit and a guy who I've heard is a top 10 potential pick in the draft in 2019. I was listening to the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini and Cole Zwicker yesterday evening, and I was really intrigued by what they were saying about Horde. When they were discussing Charles Bassey, they were talking about Horde maybe being a top 5 pick. So he's a guy who I'm got my eye on. Isaiah Musius is a guy who I'm pretty high on comparative to consensus. He's super athletic from Brooklyn. He's 6'8", and then they have Jamie Lewis, who's a top recruit as well, one of the better point guards in this draft in this class. So overall, I mean, between those three, they also have Sharon White, who's a 3.5-star point guard who's 6'5", so he might be play off the ball. They offered Jordan Lathan, the Northwestern decommit / admission revokee. I don't know how really to describe that. He's been offered by Wake Forest, so maybe they could get in on him. So I think there's some interesting potential switchability and athleticism with young talent on this roster. And this class really will define Danny Manning's tenure. If he brings in some high-level players and that can bring him to an NCAA tournament, he probably stays. If he can't, if they look awful next year, he might get the sack after the next year. He might have 2 years left. He has a pretty long contract, so maybe they have to hold on to him for another year longer than they want. But definitely like the White pickup as a veteran piece, and especially if these guys are going to be young, having a guy on the bench who's played a lot of college basketball can certainly help.
Yeah, I think Wake certainly has a very interesting team, but just the ACC is going to be so strong next season that it's hard to envision them, not being in that 12 to or like 11 to 13 range in the conference, which is a shame because you mentioned Horde, who's going to be an excellent player as a freshman, and Shundi Brown, but it's just not going to be enough, and that's a shame. Hopefully, they can work some magic and Manning can get another year because I think he is a good coach. I mean, he's been absolutely gutted between early decisions from like John Collins, who you didn't expect a recruit like that to be a top 15 pick or a top 20 pick after 2 seasons, and then Crawford and Moore, who are leaving when they're not even going to be drafted. It's just so tough to overcome. And I think even when he was at Tulsa, didn't he lose Jordan Clarkson and what's his name, Eric McClellan too? So tough luck there for Danny Manning.
Yeah, and I also think it's fair to kind of look at the situation of what we kind of deem as like a year ago, everyone was like, Danny Manning did a great job. John Collins was awesome. Look at the development. Let's give this guy an extension. He just came off an NCAA bid. He's got a young group. He's got this 2018 class already locked up early. And then all of a sudden he has a bad year. 3 guys transfer or leave early for the draft. And all of a sudden it's like, Danny Manning sucks, fire the guy. It's like, and the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. He's a fine coach. He recruits pretty well. He's always kind of underachieved with talent, but he's also lost talent early. So it's just kind of a situation of like, what do we value in terms of Danny Manning as a coach? And maybe he's not the guy you want as like your program leader who's going to like bring you to national success, but you can't argue with the class he's got brought in. So I think they have to give this group time and see what they've got before they storm the streets and try to fire Danny Manning.
They also lost Kostas Mitroglou, who was their starting power forward, like pretty late in the offseason, I think, who went pro back in Europe. So that's just another example of, I mean, at some point it's the coach's responsibility to keep the players, but at the same time, there's like nothing that you can do in some cases. So it's just a really, really tough situation, and there's just a ton of luck involved. Similar to what happened with, I think, Mark Fox at Georgia, where they lost Travis Leslie and Trey Tompkins, both as juniors, to be second-round picks. And I think either the next year or 2 seasons later, they lost Contavious Caldwell-Pope as a sophomore. So, I mean, unless you're these elite programs that are constantly churning out these high-level recruits, I mean, NBA draft early entries are something that can legitimately kill a program.
Well, and you kind of look at the future of this Wake Forest team, and we talk about Horde. This is a guy who Danny Manning invested an incredible amount of time in to recruit. And if all of a sudden Jalen Horde on a bad team goes for 18 a game and gets drafted in the top 5 as a one and done, it's all over, and it was wasted on a year that stunk. Like,
Yeah.
it's brutal for this team, and that's why I think I'm a little worried about this group, is because if you lose him all of a sudden, it's like, well, now we have Mucius, who's pretty good, and some of the younger guys, but to lose that key piece is pretty brutal.
So I propose that we move on to NBA draft, and then if we have time at the end, we can go back to some of these latest recruits and who's left on the board. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so first we have Michael Porter, who news came out yesterday that he was so injured with recent hip spasms that he not only canceled his workouts but could not even get out of bed. And a lot of people are saying, this is terrible news. This is, what a mistake by Michael Porter's camp to get this information let out. But I think it's a smokescreen to get him to fall to a certain team, probably the Bulls in the draft, because I mean he fits so well with Sacramento and even with Memphis that the Bulls, who probably thought that they would have a chance to get him all season, are probably a little worried now. So one, Kevin, do you think that Porter's injuryness of his whole profile should be a concern? And two, what do you think about this recent news?
Well, I will point out that he pointed out that the knee, the hip, that it was originally diagnosed as a hip injury when he hurt his back the first time, which is why I was a little concerned by that back injury. But overall, I mean, it's a little concerning just to have these injuries, especially for a guy his size and with his length. Sometimes you worry that a guy is going to have constant injury woes with, back and feet. Those are tough injuries to kind of overcome. So it's a bit concerning, but to me, I'm super high on Porter. I think I'm a little just more concerned because we haven't seen some of the stuff that we wanted to see in college in terms of his development. I think he's definitely the most interesting prospect in this draft in terms of he's 6'10", he's long, he can shoot the ball extremely well, he's athletic, but we didn't get to really see it in college. I think it might be a play because he has a promise or is trying to find himself into the right situation, the right team. I don't think anyone wants to go to Sacramento. I know there was the buzz like, oh, the Mavericks really like Michael Porter, and people are like, well, do they really like Michael Porter? Or are they trying to smoke screen? Or I think Memphis was also involved in this. I try to, at this point, this close to the draft, I kind of take most of the news with a grain of salt in terms of the leaks of who likes who, because as Sam Vecini tweeted, it was like, you never hear this guy's workout went poorly with the Mavericks or with whatever team. You always hear if it was a good workout. So if it was actually a bad workout, it wouldn't have gotten out there. I think most of this is just blowing smoke at this point in the process. So I'm just kind of waiting for the draft to get started and see where the dominoes fall, because there's so many different ones that could impact the way the first half of this draft goes.
Well, I'm all here for all the rumors and wild speculation. I don't know if you saw this, but there's this new Twitter account called like NBA Draft God, and this guy has been like, reporting with sources, and I mean he's gotten like 2,000 followers in 6 weeks, I guess, and he's just like, oh, sources say this trade, yada yada yada, and people are like believing him. And I guess time will tell if he's going to be right or not. But he's just been like wildly throwing like rumors and stuff out. I saw one where I think it was Memphis trades Deonta Davis and the 4th pick to the Bulls for the 7th pick and the 2nd round pick, which like didn't make any sense. But he was like, oh no, like this is what I'm hearing from my sources. So that's another wrinkle of this draft coverage. The wild source speculation.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what people will believe on Twitter. I think like NBA Twitter and like draft Twitter as a whole is just like super, like it's super funny because there's all the people from like the Stepien or other like draft websites that bring their like in-depth analysis where they're like Zaire Smith is the next coming. And then there's like the people who are out there making up like weird stuff that they're just going to report and see what sticks. There's all the rumors that just get leaked by teams. So honestly, it's hard to follow. It's fun to watch, but as someone who's not as involved in draft Twitter, it's fun to watch from the outside looking in and watch all these guys kind of just bicker for the next week or so.
Definitely another rumor draft related that I heard was that Atlanta might get Trae Young at number 3, and if not, they could like potentially trade down, like if they think that's too high. But I mean, I don't know about that fit with Trae Young when you could get a guy like Luka Doncic at 3, or even Michael Porter, who, you know, they can fit more in the modern NBA in terms of their size and ability to switch. A guy like Young is going to get picked on defensively a lot. And if you're Atlanta and there's this huge point guard out there, and you already have some pretty good wings with like Taurean Prince and Kent Bazemore, I mean, this is a perfect opportunity to build like this ultra switching lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to watch. Let's kind of move on here on this draft talk. A couple guys who we think will fall in the draft, a couple guys we think who can rise in the draft. Brad, a couple thoughts on those in particular. I've kind of been looking it over. I have a couple thoughts. I'm interested to hear what you've got to say.
Okay, so one guy who I think will fall in the draft is Zanin Musa. He's one of the top international guys available. He's a scoring wing who doesn't play a lot of defense, but you know, his range is supposed to be between like 17 and 30. But there are a ton of wings in that range who have, I think, better two-way potential, or even are better players. I mean, guys like Kevin Huerter, Chandler Hutchinson, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Okogie. So I think, you know, the uncertainty with him being a international player plus this glut of wings could see him drop a lot further than many people anticipate.
The one thing I will kind of say there is there's a few teams who don't necessarily have the cap space in the late first round, like Portland, for instance. They need assets, but at the same time, they also don't have a ton of cap space. Where like maybe they could draft Musa and stash him for a year or two if they're worried about cap space, if they can't make a trade to kind of package this first with like an Evan Turner or something to get out of some cap woes. A guy I think is going to rise because I'm going to go kind of hot take and say he goes at number 9 to the Knicks is Lonnie Walker. There's kind of reports out there that Lonnie Walker or the Knicks are infatuated with Lonnie Walker. There was reports of a 3-hour-long dinner between Walker and Knicks executives, which I think would be just a horrible mistake to draft Lonnie Walker over, even if like, because it's almost guaranteed that Mikal Bridges, Miles Bridges, or Michael Porter will be on the board when the Knicks pick. It'd be stunning if one wasn't. And if not, then like Trae Young will be on the board. If you skip on one of those guys to draft Lonnie Walker, I think it'd be a horrible mistake. But it'd be the Knicks, so would we be surprised?
I agree 100% on Lonnie Walker. I like him a lot in that like 14, 15, like a 14 to 17 range. I think 9 is way too high, especially when you already have like Tim Hardaway locked up long term, and you have Frank Ntilikina, who's someone who you think is going to be a 2 guard in the future. I mean, Mikal Bridges, Miles Bridges, even like Shea Alexander. I mean, they would just be, you know, much better fits. And back to Musa for 1 second. I had read that he does not want to be stashed, and he's definitely coming over. Which, I mean, if he were being stashed, his stock would be a lot higher. It was similar to I think from 2 drafts ago, where there's Ante Zizic and Ivica Zubac, and Zubac was the superior prospect, but he was insistent that he wanted to come over right away. And that's why guys like Yabusele and Zizic were picked before him, because they were willing to be stashed a year and not incur a cap hit or a roster spot. Ironically, both went to the Celtics, who, you know, couldn't take any more contracts. So that's another reason that I think that Musa could fall.
Yeah, that's a good call. On the Walker thing, like I agree with you that like the 15 range is right for him. And if I'm the Knicks, why don't I say to the Clippers, I mean, I don't think the Clippers would give up 12 and 13 for 9 unless they're like infatuated with, say, Wendell Carter, and they're like, we really want Wendell Carter, and he's there, and so we'll move up to take him. But the Clipper, you might be able to get an asset and like 12 or an asset and 13 from the Clippers and still get Lonnie Walker. Like, there's no reason to pick Lonnie Walker at 9 when I don't think the Sixers are going to take Lonnie Walker if Mikal Bridges, Michael Porter, or Miles Bridges are on the board. I don't think he'd go at 11 to Charlotte. Like, at some point, you just have to be smart about your drafting, and I don't think the Knicks would be smart to draft Lonnie Walker.
Agreed. Another player that I think could fall is Colin Sexton, and that's just looking at a mock draft and like what teams need. I think his range probably starts at 8 to Cleveland. Maybe he could go to the Knicks, but we mentioned that they're super interested in Walker, and some of the other wings could be a good fit. And then Charlotte, I mean, I guess if they wanted to move on from Kemba Walker, he could be a nice pick. But I think Shai Alexander would be a better pick because I think Shai is a better prospect, and his size will compensate for Malik Monk being undersized. That's kind of an interesting future backcourt. Alexander also has the size to play with Kemba Walker. Just give them a little more versatility. So I think Sexton's probably going to go in that 12-13 range to the Clippers. If they pass, probably not until 16 to the Suns. So that's a pretty steep drop for a guy who is a pretty highly regarded prospect.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see like who's the guy who just kind of gets positionally screwed, and it could be Sexton for sure. The guy I think might fall is Anthony Simons.
I him too.
With the lack of buzz. I just feel like it's a little odd that we're not hearing a lot about him. He wasn't a guy who like impressed at the combine with his like physical traits, and obviously he has a lot of developing to do to get ready to play college NBA basketball with skipping college. IMG is a good level, but it's not college basketball. He has the 6'7" wingspan, which is pretty solid. He can score on the perimeter, but I don't necessarily see a scenario in which he's better than, say, like a Lou Williams, J.R. Smith type sixth man. And so I could see a lot of teams when you're falling into like the 20 to 30 range, is it worth taking a risk on a guy that's going to take 3 years when you're trying to contend now? So I could see him maybe falling into the second round.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a second rounder at this point. I think he could even fall like closer to like the mid-second round because guys in his range who I would rather have, like Aaron Holiday, I would definitely rather have Grayson Allen, D'Anthony Melton, Jalen Brunson, Javon Carter, Elie Kobo, Kyrie Thomas. I mean, I would rather have all those guys. I think he kind of falls to the range where you're deciding between like a more established guy like Devontae Graham, who has probably lower upside, or this perceived high upside guy Simon. So I think he could even fall into the Devontae Graham, Landry Shamet, Trayvon Duval range.
Yeah, that's a good call, and that's where the second round trading of picks, or a team could maybe buy a second rounder and try to steal him, could be where he winds up. One guy I'm really watching, I don't really know whether he rises or falls, is D'Anthony Melton, because I think his stock is just super varying. He's 6'3" and basically a 2, but he's got such good instincts, has the secondary creation abilities, and I'm excited to watch. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Melton? I'm pretty high on him.
I'm kind of blah on Melton. He's definitely an NBA player. He's a great defender, but he has good length, but he is pretty undersized, and he's not a great shooter. I think maybe like Memphis in the second round, maybe Phoenix in the second round, like at the very top. But the big like draft gurus, like the people from the Stepien, have him like as a solid first rounder on their boards. I'm not sure if they necessarily think he's going to go that high. I know a lot of mocks I've seen have him going to the Lakers at 25, but I think he'll just be like a solid kind of role player off the bench. I don't think his upside's very high. Excuse me. But I mean, I could definitely be proven wrong. But two of the guys who I think will rise, who are both like similar players in terms of being defense first, but can actually shoot the ball, are Kyrie Thomas and Javon Carter. Two guys who I think will rise. And both of them I would rather have, and I think teams would also rather have than D'Anthony Melton.
Yeah, I completely agree there. But it's such an interesting tier of guards in that mid second round or late first, early second. That's going to be really interesting to see kind of when they'll go off the board. I know we wanted to touch on some like second round sleepers. Any guys you have your eye on?
So I like Jared Vanderbilt. I know he's such a risk in terms of health and his complete lack of shooting ability, but in the second round, I think a good title contending team should definitely take a flyer. I think he could do a lot of the things that Kayvon Looney did. Looney was in college a much better offensive player than Jared Vanderbilt. He had a much better jump shot, but in terms of what Golden State had Looney do, where he didn't even have a yellow light in terms of shooting, Vanderbilt can go to a team. He's an elite rebounder. He's a potential small ball five who could potentially switch, and he has such a high motor that I think he could really excel in that Kevon Looney mode. And it won't even matter that Looney is so much better offensively because what both are going to be asked to do in an NBA setting. And I think those skills that Looney has to rely on in terms of his rebounding and his switchability, I think Vanderbilt can actually do that better. So that's a reason that teams like maybe Houston or Golden State or Boston should definitely take a flyer.
Yeah, I completely agree on Jared Vanderbilt. I'll go with a big guy, Chimezie Metu, from USC. I think he's just going to be like a good rotation player in the NBA, and that's good value at 45 or wherever he winds up going. I do want to point out while I'm on the topic, I saw in the Ringer in their big draft preview. One of the comparisons they made for Chimezie Metu was Georges Niang, which is about as opposite a player as you could possibly make for Chimezie Metu. Metu's like a super athletic rim runner who's going to bring you some energy, rebounding, block some shots, dunk the ball. I think the stat I saw was he dunked the ball 78 times this season for USC, and Georges Niang dunked 7 times in this 4-year career at Iowa State. Whereas Niang's like a point forward creator who can be kind of a lead the fast break type of guy. I just thought that was a really funny comparison, but I really like Metu. I think he's a rotation player in the NBA kind of from day one. So that's good value in the second round.
Yeah, I like Metu a lot. I did notice those player comparisons too. I mean, player comparisons are really hard. I mean, especially trying to find one for every player, it's going to be impossible unless you can remember, I mean, every player who played in college or in the NBA who was meaningful in like the past like 20 years, like right off the top of your head, and like pull that out. It's very difficult. Another really bad comparison that I saw in the mock draft, which actually goes with my second draft sleeper for the second round, Vince Edwards. They compared Vince Edwards to Ben Bentel, which, I mean, I've seen every single game of Bentel's college career, and I've seen a lot of Vincent Edwards. And that might even be more opposite than the Metu Niang. But I mean, Edwards is going to be a 3-and-D player. He's a wing who can play some 4, and he's a excellent defender. Bentel plays no defense. He's a 4-5 who's like a stretch 4, and can like post up and score. I mean, it's like not even remotely close. I mean, at least Metu and Georges Niang are actually the same position.
Yeah, there you go. That was really that was bad. I'm really bad at making draft comparisons. I will like completely own up to it. I know you're a lot better than me, Brad. Whenever you make a comparison, I'm like, dang, that was a good one. I really just missed that. But I just could not believe. Like, I would rather leave the comparison spot blank than compare Chimezie Metu to Georges Niang. Like, that is just so bad. And Bentel and Edwards is super bad as well. Another second round sleeper, mostly because I think his stock has dropped so much, kind of unnecessarily, is Brandon McCoy. Like, I think we're kind of just forgetting that he was genuinely awesome at UNLV, averaged 17 and 10, blocked almost 2 shots a game, even showed a little bit of a potential to hit a 3, 55% from the field. Like, there's just because the center is going away in the NBA doesn't mean there's not a place for a dude 7'1" and plays and he can score in the post. I think he could be like that sixth man scorer, big man type of thing, like kind of like a Maurice Spates, but not a shooter. Where like you come in off the bench and you just give energy and points off the bench and then go back and then leave the game, kind of play quick spurts, get some post ups. I think that could be his role. I think his stock has dropped so low to like the 50s, maybe even undrafted, where he's a steal to me, because I think he's probably like a 30 to 40 range prospect in this draft.
Yeah, I didn't really like him from his combine performance, but I mean that is just a scrimmage there. I mean, he struggled with the length and athleticism in like physicality in the paint. I did like his jump shot. I think maybe like a Jason Smith type or like Justin Hamilton, kind of like a stretch five. I think maybe he gets a two-way contract. I don't see him getting drafted. I mean, there's some. I mean, one of my potential undrafted sleepers who I think could make an impact is Raymond Spalding. I think Spalding is definitely a superior prospect to a Brandon McCoy because he's just so athletic and such a impact athlete, whereas McCoy isn't as strong of an athlete and is more of a skilled big man.
Right, and I think the big concern for me with McCoy is he ever going to defend on the perimeter. And I don't think that answer is yes right now. I think he's pretty much just not going to ever defend on the perimeter, and that's okay. Limits his upside in the modern NBA.
Okay, did you have any other second round sleepers?
Not anyone that I like super wanted to touch on. I know there's like the Grayson Allen to the Celtics buzz, which would be fun, and I feel like Brad Stevens would make Grayson Allen a good player, which would be kind of weird. But overall, I'm just kind of excited to get to the draft.
Yeah, I'd also want to mention Wenyen Gabriel, who if he can shoot the ball like he did toward the end of the year, I mean he's definitely going to be an NBA player. Maybe even a small ball five. He's high motor, and if he can, shoot that three, that's even more impactful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I like Wenyen Gabriel a lot. He's a guy who he also just like brings energy, and he's a competitor and leader. He was a leader on this Kentucky team that was super young, which I give him a lot of credit for. So overall, I think Gabriel's kind of getting slept on as a recruit.
Any other draft things that you want to touch on, or do you think we did enough here?
I think we kind of touched on everything I really wanted to touch on. I've kind of been overwhelmed by like reading every single list of guys who got getting like invites to work out, like guys who I don't really see even as like close to NBA prospects. And I remember it's like mostly just like summer league workouts, like favors, things like that. But it's always kind of weird to try to break down what draft and what like workout invites are really like just summer league tryouts and what are actually potential draftees. Like I remember last year, Sienna's Marquise Wright got a workout for the Wizards late in the process, and people like, does that mean he's making the NBA from like on the Sienna forums? And I was like, dude, like he's just working out because he's from DC and they had a spot open for a workout, so he gets to work out and maybe impress him enough to get a summer league contract. And like he was awesome, and like now he's getting to play pro basketball and I think Hungary, but like he wasn't an NBA player, like never was.
Yeah, he was like a stat stuffer point guard, right? Like he had a ton of rebounds and
yeah, he was a really good rebounder for a small guy. Shot the ball better his senior year. He could really get to the rim. He was a fun guy. He's a good pro player. He's going to be on their TBT team, which I'm excited for this summer. They're going to be down in Brooklyn a weekend. I'm supposed to be down in Long Island, so maybe I'll pop down for some TBT action on the Sunday. So that could be fun. I
think I might have a little player confusion right now. I think I might be thinking of the guy from George Mason. I'm going to do a quick search.
Wright was similar to the guy at George Mason I'm pretty sure you're talking about, that I'm blanking a name on. But you might be confusing.
Marquise Moore.
Oh, yeah, Marquise Moore rebounded like crazy.
Yeah, sorry.
Marquise Wright averaged like 6 rebounds a game, though, for a 5'11" point guard, so that's pretty good still.
Yeah, Marquise Moore in 2016-2017, 17 points a game, 3.5 assists, 11 rebounds per game as a 6'2" guard.
He was so absurd. I really enjoyed watching him play basketball. Like every time I was like, this is so fun. Just watch this little dude get like 11 rebounds a game in the A10. It helped that Nate Paulson doesn't really play a lot of big guys. So Marquise Moore got a lot of rebounds, but Marquise Wright at Siena was a 17.4 rebound, 5 assist guy his senior season. But he had a couple games where he pushed towards triple-double territory. So he was always a favorite of mine for the Saints, and I'm looking forward to watching him on their TBT team. They're a 9 seed. They've got Ronald Moore, Kenny Hasbrook, Ryan Rosser, a couple other Siena greats. So they have – I forget who they have in the first game. I know they're lined up with the Syracuse alumni team for a second-round game if they can win their 8-9 games. So that could be fun to watch. I'm really looking forward to all of TBT. I know there's an Iona alumni team that should be pretty good. A lot of good alumni teams, which are it's always fun for me as a fan to watch because a lot of these alumni teams are like guys who are right when I like started watching college basketball really seriously. So it's great to kind of see all these guys and see how they're doing in pro basketball.
When does that start? Does that start after Summer League?
I think there's a couple of like smaller regional games. Like I know the Big East one I think is like 2 weekends from now. And then there's a couple of regionals that are the second weekend in July and a couple the third weekend in July. So it kind of gets going right around after Summer League. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be a nice little buffer until we're, frantically searching for Facebook live streams for these foreign trip games where they're ultimately meaningless.
Gotta love foreign trip games. Foreign trip hot takes are some of my favorite hot takes in college basketball. So looking forward to that. Bear with us this summer, guys. It's tough. I know after the draft, we're going to kind of get started with our deep dive team previews, which I'm super excited about doing. I know that was an idea of Brad's that I'm really excited about kind of putting into action. And so we'll definitely take your guys' opinions on Twitter about what teams you guys want us to dive on. And we'll definitely get into those. A lot of good summer content coming. And we're less than 5 months from college basketball season. So stick with us. Keep following the Twitters. Keep reading our articles. I know Brad's got something big in the pipeline at Busting Brackets that you guys will have to look out for. But things are going well. Any last thoughts, Brad, before we wrap this one up?
Nothing too crazy. Just check out the top 30 grad transfer article. It actually did fairly well. It was my most viewed article ever. So that's something.
Boom. Love to see it. Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed that article. I read it like 4 times because I kept like referencing it while I was making my list.
Oh, thanks.
So, shout out Brad. Does a good job over at Busting Brackets. I have written quite little as I've wrapped up my freshman year at college. I have going to do a bunch more the next couple of weeks as I have some more free time. So look out for that. And look out for everything else that we'll be putting up on our Twitters and podcasting on over the next couple of weeks. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one.